Okay, Hardingham Workshop is designed primarily for sculptors and this year for paper makers. And it's an idea, the workshop idea is something that has been established, for the last 30 years or so in the art world. The idea is to get a group of artists together, and often with an artist leader or with a visiting critic or with someone that can provide some outside input, and create a situation where they can work together and can get stimulating advice or some kind of stimulating comment on their work that can possibly force them into new areas and so forth. This is the second Hardingham workshop. The first was 2 years ago, 1986. This one is a little smaller and has paper makers as well as sculptors. One of the advantages of a sculpture workshop here in Norfolk is that it has a very good working location here in Gresham Farm. These big stone areas and work sheds and so forth. Very good equipment and access to an enormous variety of steel from the Norfolk area. And that kind of variety is very important to sculptors. Now, it means that sculptors can come and work pretty much in their own idiom without having to have it restricted by an inadequate steel supply. So that's, again, a very, very important aspect of this workshop. The workshop brings artists together from America, especially Canada, and England. There are 3 Canadian sculptors, Catherine Burgess, Vesna Macaulay, and Peter Hyde, who was actually born in England and works part-time in England. All of them are from Edmonton. I myself am from Edmonton, too, which is in western Canada. Randy Bloom is an American papermaker who lives in New York City, and she's leading the papermaking area of the workshop. Now, right now, we're looking at Andrew Sloan, who's a Norfolk sculptor working on a very large piece that's constructed out of a lot of bent and twisted steel that is made with a steel crusher. It's scrap that has been crushed. And he's got an enormous facility at cutting and opening and transforming these crushed pieces of steel. I think it's very difficult steel to use, but one of the advantages of it is it gives a feeling of something like drapery, and drapery is one of the ways that sculptors in the past have varied the surface of sculpture. So think of these as very large, abstract drapery constructions. Vesna Macaulay is a sculptor from Edmonton. She works with a combination of very linear elements and sort of enclosing plates, which are placed at very rhythmic angles. Her sculpture is very graceful, exploits a lot of curves, and has a pretty high degree of finish compared to some of the other sculptors. Sharing a studio, or sharing the other half of the studio, is Richard Crooks, a young British sculptor. This is his first workshop. Some of the sculptors have been to 2 and more workshops. So for a first-time sculptor at a workshop, this offers a particularly important kind of opportunity, I think. Here he's taking advantage of an assistant to do some grinding. Oh no, I'm sorry, some cutting. young sculptors usually don't have access to assistants, so this workshop environment is particularly good for them. It also allows them to work, since there's a good steel supply, good good equipment, including lifting equipment as well as cutting and welding equipment. It gives them the opportunity to produce a lot of sculpture in a fairly short time. And I think that kind of experience is very important for sculptors. It gives them a chance to compare their own work, one work with another, and it also gives them a chance to compare their work with the work of other sculptors, other contemporary sculptors. This is Sean Cassidy, a young sculptor from Norfolk, and he's building a sculpture out of various pieces of bent steel, which he often pieces together into volumes, rather rectangular volumes in many cases. But his sculptures have a kind of waving, undulating quality given to them by these peculiar pieces of steel. He's done 3 or 4 sculptures at this workshop. I think I mentioned earlier that it's a very useful thing for artists to work on more than one sculpture at a time. And often in a workshop situation, that's very important, because artists should be and can develop ideas very rapidly. And you know, it's a good idea to move from one sculpture to the next fairly quickly. This is Barbara Lander, who's a sculptor from the London area. She's done some very beautiful sculptures with folded pieces of steel, some of them small, some of them middle size, with the real inventiveness. There are 3 main physical jobs involved in sculpture making, perhaps 4 if you count lifting. The first, of course, is welding. A second is cutting, which is often done before the welding and after the welding, and is a very important editing resource. And finally, grinding, which is cleaning up and smoothing off rough edges and so forth. The grinding is a particularly noisy process, so sculpture making, especially at a workshop, has a real factory atmosphere, and you can hear it for about a mile off. Now, this is a Canadian sculptor, Catherine Burgess, from Edmonton. her pieces are very architectural in feeling, often made with very simple flat plates, cylinders, rods, uh, almost architectural-like or furniture-like elements. But the sculptures don't have the feeling of being architectural models. They're very playful constructions which use a lot of drawing with steel, drawing in space, that emerges from a kind of back plate and plays off a kind of sculptural roof. But the roof, as I say, is purely sculptural. It's not like the model of a house or anything. This is a good, gives you some idea of the kind of safety equipment that sculptors have to use. They have to protect their ears from the grinding noise, their lungs from the fumes, and their eyes from flash and particles and things like that. Arc welding is extremely bright. She was grinding in this case, but the arc made by welding rod is extremely bright, and welders have to use special masks to cut down the light. It's extremely dangerous for the eyes. This is Peter Hyde, who is British-born and British-trained, but now lives in Edmonton, Canada, for much of each year. He teaches at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. He's a very important sculptor and one of the leading sculpture teachers in the world today. One of the things that's very distinctive about his art is that it's very upright. It sort of adheres to the overall configuration of the human figure, but it's not at all anthropomorphic. It's not humanistic in its particulars. His sculptures don't have heads and feet and torsos and things like that, which a lot of earlier upright abstract sculpture had. In other words, I think Hyde has found a way to return sculpture to uprightness without making it depend explicitly on the human figure with its parts. It's now a kind of upright thing with abstract parts. Nevertheless, he's very, very influenced by and interested in sculpture from the past, figure sculpture from the past, and I think has been a leader in bringing some of the effects of that sculpture, things like the twisting of the figure, contrapposto, shifting tensions between one side of the sculpture and the other, a great deal of ambiguity about where, in fact, the front of a sculpture is. In other words, producing a kind of twisting sculpture in the round, emphasizing an irregular and sometimes very expressive contour for the sculpture. All of those kinds of things, and then gaining some of the monumental effects that sheer height can bring. Hyde often makes sculptures between 8 and 10 feet high, and that in itself gives them a kind of monumentality, kind of grandeur. his sculptures often start with very loose arrangements of seemingly irreconcilable parts. And you sense a real struggle to make some kind of coherence out of these seemingly irreconcilable things. As you see here, there's a pipe and some kind of disc-shaped object, and there's another kind of square kind of chimney moved into that sculpture. And I think one of the challenges to the artist in making this kind of work is to take the functional associations away from these objects, from pipes and things like that, and make them play a new kind of role in a work of art. This is generally what abstract sculpture attempts to do, but becomes very clear and explicit in Hyde's work. Okay, this is John Foster painting a piece of steel with a kind of very diluted whitewash. He does this, I think, to unify the steel so that one piece doesn't stand out so much from another piece. There's often distinct variations in color and finish in found steel especially, and scrap steel. The other thing that I think he uses it for is to lighten the overall surface so he can see the relationships better. Rust is often, and new steel is often rather dark, and sometimes difficult to differentiate because of that.
Yeah.